Hello, everyone out there. Say hi to everybody. Say hi to each other here, and thank you for joining us. This will be the last formal lecture of the semester. I will continue providing lectures throughout the summer on this online format, having a good time disseminating some of this information to the class as well as to a larger audience. And so, welcome CO210 and general public. Hope we're all still doing well, staying safe, staying close to home, and of course, staying intellectually interested in the world around you. And of course, that means this class. And so, congratulate yourselves and each other for making it this far in the semester. And so, we're almost done. We are at announcement number 8, and so we've had 8 announcements so far throughout the semester since we've gone online. Please refer to all of these announcements if you have not already. We are on announcement number 8. We have asked 6 questions. And so remember that these lectures are also on YouTube at H. Hawkins F, my YouTube channel. They're also, of course, here on Instagram Live, and they will stay up for about 24 hours. And you can also refer to the textbook and just answer any question posed in the textbook, or simply discuss a term in a 3 to 5 sentence response and email that to me 6 times this semester. And so congratulate yourself. Most of us have responded 4 or 5 times, and so we're pretty much caught up. At this point, after this lecture, we will have a total of 6 responses that I will expect from you. You can respond with 1 email and respond to 6 questions, either posed during lecture or posed anywhere in the textbook for class credit. And so remember, you don't have to be tuning into these lectures to respond to these questions, but it does make the classroom environment much more dynamic, interesting, and your job a little bit easier. And so this will be our last formal lecture. I will continue to lecture and present information in some format as we continue to live most of our lives in isolation or social distancing. And so, but with that said, please respond to 6 questions, and this will be the last formal lecture that we will be required to tune into with CO 210. So congratulate yourselves. The persuasive speech, hopefully we are doing well conducting our persuasive speech assignment in the electronic apparatus. I have received quite a few from the students, and really good job. It's really interesting to see our voices and our faces and the spaces that we are creating these videos within. And it's really nice for me to be able to open up these persuasive speeches, see all the hard work that you put into them, and then of course evaluate you and grade you accordingly. And so really good job. If we are having trouble, don't panic. Once again, we're dealing with the electronic format that we have at our disposal. And so ideally, you can just email me a self-contained video file, and I can open up this video file and view your persuasive speech. Remember to turn in the outline and a little bit of the write-up for the collaboration component. And so I have received many of these. Excellent job. Really exciting to see some of the things that we've been doing for a long time in the Academy, such as presenting speeches and presentations done in this electronic format. And so very interesting and exciting for me. Of course, there might be some issues. And so Google Drive, Google Docs seems to be the best and most easiest. If you can convert your file and upload it onto Google Drive and email me that link, I've been able to pull up many of the students' recorded speeches. And so play around with that and try to get that file to me. I will be lenient in the due date, which is today, for our persuasive speech if we're having technical difficulties. So hopefully you can email it to me. If it's available on another source, Facebook or YouTube or even Instagram, and you can make that link available to me, please. Then if I can view the recorded speech, then that's fine. And so Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube are three other platforms that we might use. As a last resort, if you record it on your phone and you want to WhatsApp me, then email me and I will give you the number for the WhatsApp to present your video version of your persuasive speech to me in that format. And so we have a few formats at our disposal. The best one is just to email me a self-contained file in some way. And then second best is a Google Doc link that I can just pull up. And so hopefully we are all having fun with that and working toward that deadline, which is today. Like I said, if we're having technical difficulties, I'll be lenient as we move forward towards the end of the semester. And so congratulate yourselves. We've made it a very long way throughout the semester. Of course, we've had some obstacles in our path, but even more so, more of a reason to keep on pushing and finish this semester strong. And so hopefully we're finishing the rest of our classes strong as well. So persuasive speech is due. Unit 2 test, I will announce on Monday. Our study guide is up, and I'll be going over some of the terms, such as verbal communication, codes, grammar, and symbols, language is arbitrary and abstract, so on and so forth, as we go over a little bit of the recap of some of the terms that we've looked at this semester and some of the terms that will be on our Unit 2 test. So please refer to our study guide. Our study guide is up on our Moodle assignment, on our Moodle platform, as well as our announcements A1 through A8. And so please make sure that we are continuing to refer to those. As far as the Unit 2 test, I will issue the Unit 2 test on Monday. And we will have until Thursday, 4 days later, to complete the assignment. Also, lastly, this will be the last formal lecture that we will have to tune into or get the information from the textbook, which is always available as well, in an asynchronous approach to online learning. And respond to 6 questions. And so if you could respond to 6 questions, this is the last one that I will expect here. And for this one, we can really respond and define and discuss in a 3 to 5 sentence paragraph any of the terms that we will discuss today. So verbal communication, codes and grammar, so on and so forth. Just discuss any of these terms today in a response, and that will be your final requirement in terms of the attendance grade. Nice responses and discussions that we're having down below. Remember that small collaboration component. Since live speeches happen with a live audience, here I'm asking us to record ourselves. I'm simply asking you to either show this recording to somebody else or if you worked with somebody in the production of this speech, then they most likely witnessed you delivering the speech in some way. And so discuss in the small collaboration component a little bit of what it was like to work with another human being during the live presentation of this recorded speech. And so go back to that assignment prompt, read it carefully, read it slowly, and make sure you fulfill that small collaboration component, just so we know that we have a live audience helping you and assisting you and creating some sort of live interaction while we're doing the recorded speech. Okay, so once again, really the topic at hand is our persuasive speech, turning in these persuasive speeches today. And so email me that video as well as the outline and the small write-up. If you are having issues with the tech, remember that an email with a video contained is the best option. Google Drives is a close second. And then we have a few other tertiary formats or secondary formats that we can use. YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, or as a last resort, WhatsApp. And so if we work together, we will find a way to view the recorded speech that you produced. And so hopefully we have produced these videos, and that's one of the most important things, is we're producing this video, and then we'll figure out how to get it to me. So verbal communication, going all the way back to chapter 4.2, we are just going over and a little bit of review of our terms this semester. And so remember, we read an introduction to communication by Lynn H. Turner and Richard West. Remember the titles. Verbal communication is the title of chapter 4. And so as we go back and sort of recap all of this information this semester, let's remember the headings, the subheadings, the authors, and of course the titles of the chapters that we looked at, because a lot of the information is contained right there in some of these bold headlines and headings. And so verbal communication, how important is verbal communication to our everyday interactions? Obviously very important, but it's only about 20 to 15% of overall communication. The rest of our overall communication is nonverbal communication. The ways that we sit, the ways that we gesture, the looks on our face. Most people know a little bit about what we are going to say. They know a little bit about how we're feeling, what our relationships are with the people around us based on our nonverbal communication. But verbal communication is so important in articulating that small but very precise 20 to 15% of overall communication. And so what is verbal communication? Verbal communication is speech through linguistic codes. And so verbal communication is really a code. And we can create any code we want, really, to communicate. But a language is a mutually accepted code. And so many of us know this code, and we are able to communicate somewhat effectively with other people. But nevertheless, it is still quite a specific and abstract code. And so grammar comes into play here, the way that we organize the symbols, the way that we use punctuation, the pauses, the dictation, and the way that we use the code changes the meaning of the codes that we create and receive. And so all of this is a manipulation of symbols. And remember, language is a system of symbols. And so this system of symbols is a code. It is also a language, and it is the definition of verbal communication. And so what is verbal communication? Verbal communication is any communication that exists within a symbolic system. And so is the language on the verbal or nonverbal communication? We went over this a couple weeks ago. The language on the screen, of course, is verbal communication. Why? Because it sits within a system of symbols. So the color of my shirt, the gestures that I'm making are nonverbal. But the language that's written on the screen, and even though it is not spoken, it is not oral, it is still a form of verbal communication because it sits within a symbolic system. And so let's remember that language is arbitrary and abstract. Words are abstract. If I say bank, I don't know if I'm referring to the bank of a river or the bank that you walk into and deposit your money. Furthermore, they're arbitrary. There's no reason why the word bank should refer to either the shore of a river or a place where you deposit money. There's no natural referent to the thing. So the symbol and the thing are disconnected. And there's a very tenuous dotted line connection between the two. And it's arbitrary. One day we just said bank. And that refers to the object that we are referring to. We could easily change that and change the symbol for bank to almost anything that we want, and it will still make sense within a mutually agreed upon system of symbols or a language. And so remember, language is abstract and arbitrary. It's also, another A, quite ambiguous. Sometimes we use strategic ambiguity. And strategic ambiguity in language is when you are vague on purpose. And so we don't know if something was huge. Oh, this was a huge wave that I surfed the other day. We don't really know what huge means. Is it huge in relation to that day, that region, to your size, or in the history of all waves, or the history of waves that you can surf? We really don't know. So it's ambiguous, ambiguity. And sometimes we practice strategic ambiguity. I'll be there around noon-ish, we might say. And so we don't know when noon-ish is, right? And I think it's around noon, but it's a strategic ambiguity. And so all language is ambiguous. We don't really know what exactly it is we are referring to. If I say, I feel sad one day, or I feel happy, it's somewhat ambiguous how I'm actually feeling. Why? Because that word is an inadequate place mark for the actual feeling that we are feeling, or the actual thing that we are referring to. And so it's ambiguous. It's somewhere near what I might understand, or what we might mutually agree upon is sad, or new, or happy, or huge. So language is arbitrary, abstract, and ambiguous. Sometimes we deal with strategic ambiguity, and we are vague on purpose. The thing and the symbol are disconnected, but we bring them together every time we use verbal communication. Still in chapter 4, now remember we're only looking at chapters 4.2 of verbal communication, and we're looking at pages 79 through 92, and this is for the first reading of unit number 2. And so feel free to comment on any of the terms as our today's question and our last question, question number 6. Please feel free to define any of the terms that we are discussing here and to contend with them, meaning to discuss them according to how you see their definition and how you relate this term to your own worlds and your own lives and experiences. All language is verbal. All language is symbolic. we noted recently that all language is rhetorical, it has influence, and all language is cultural. That means that it presents a way of knowing the world around you. And so, if we think about words that are cultural, we might think about words that have a specific meaning within a specific context. But if we think about all words as cultural, then we can understand what culture is. It's a way of knowing. It's a series of practices and beliefs and values that are shared by many. And the words that we use all point to a certain reality and offer a certain way of knowing the world, a cultural perspective presented through the symbols that we attach to reality. And so remember that every word has a definition that's in the dictionary, it's mutually agreed upon, but then it also has a cultural connotation for each individual and says something about the interaction that you are engaging in. So these words have meaning, and of course, not all of the word. Every word doesn't have the same meaning, the same every time. Sorry, every time. And so if you say a word over and over again, word, 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 hope, 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 hope. Every single time you say it, it takes on a different meaning. You said hope 8 times, you said hope 22 times. That 23rd time you said the word, it will have a different meaning because you said it again, right? And so all words have meaning. That meaning is dynamic. It's in flux, meaning it always changes. All words are cultural. They have a meaning within a certain context. And then all words are influential. They make an impact. And that impact we might call as a rhetorical impact. Think about it. Next time you say anything, how is the world going to be different after I say these words? And in doing so, you are looking at what is produced. I like this term. What is produced by the words that I'm saying? And you could think about it in your head, and you could engage in philosophical thought and predict the future in some way. Okay, I'm in this situation, I'm going to say something. How is this situation going to be different after I speak? And so you might say a compliment to somebody. That's a nice shirt. And afterwards, they respond positively. They're a little bit more open to you. They might reply with something nice as well. Oh, I like your hat. And the words that you said were influential, right? They were rhetorical, and they had an impact, and they changed the situation, even if it is ever so slightly. And so think about the rhetorical impact of our words. How might your words have a rhetorical impact? And what might you want to use your voice for in the future? Whether that's professional, whether it's social, cultural, or individual, or associated with your family in some way. How might you use your voice? And so the voice and communication is a tool. How will we use it? So lastly, linguistic determinism or relativity theory. Sapir-Whorf, 2 theorists from the 1970s, noted that we don't just describe an external reality that sits neutral and inert, waiting for us to describe it, but language presents us with somewhat of a small pinhole or a box to see the world through. And so if we don't have a word for it, Sapir and Whorf, through linguistic determinism, noted that it might not exist. And so think about things that didn't exist. Think about things that we don't have a word for, and then think about if they exist or not. And so this is somewhat of a philosophical conundrum. Sure, it might exist out there, but we're not in society, but we're not aware of it. And so, does it exist for us? And then all of a sudden, we have a name for it. Okay, I have a name for it, and now I can see it. But not only can I see it, I can see it in a certain way. And so, every word that we have presents a certain version of a reality to us. And so, every language, according to linguistic determinism, determines how that culture will see the world. And so there's others that feel the opposite, that every language is just out there describing the same reality. And the language that we use to describe a reality has no bearing on the reality that we believe we exist in. Sapir and Whorf with linguistic determinism note that language presents a world to us. And as we label reality, we are constructing a certain idea about the world that we live in. Big breakthrough there around the 1970s in a linguistic symbolic turn. And so you can think about your lives and moving right along. He was moving right along, and then all of a sudden society made a turn. A linguistic turn or a symbolic turn, and came to recognize how much of an important aspect symbols play in determining the world that we live in. So chapter 3, perception. Perception consists of three elements: selection, organization, and interpretation. And so first you select something to look at. We might be looking at the red bike here in Amsterdam, I believe, on a bridge. But we might be looking at the canal in the background. We might be looking at the cars or the boats in the canal, or the streets, or maybe the coffee shops in the far right-hand corner. Maybe the bridge all the way in the back, or maybe the leaves floating on the canal. And so this is perception, and this is the first element of perception: selection. Selecting something to pay attention to. And so many of us think that we pay attention to the same things all the time as everybody else. We might see a similar scene. We're all looking at this image. But many of us are selecting something different to pay attention to. Maybe you like bikes, so you're looking at the bike. Maybe you like cars, and you're looking at the car, the street scene, or what other cues you might recognize. And so selection. Organization, we start to organize the data. And then interpretation, we interpret what we see. And so, as we're looking at our persuasive speech, hopefully we have finished our persuasive speech, and now we're working towards getting that speech to me. And I've received quite a few, and so really good job. Congratulate yourselves for turning in our final major speech assignment. In that assignment, we followed the selection, organization, and interpretation process. Selected an issue, organized the issue within two sides, at least two sides, and then argued for one side of the issue that we have selected. Moving right along, hopefully we're all doing well out there, finishing the semester strong. As we look at chapter 8, social and mass media, let's remember that mass media and social media is professional. Oftentimes, it deals with technology. There's a mediated platform between mass mediated forms of communication. And same thing with social media for the most part. And it entails an audience that is not necessarily in the room or in the physical space. And so we're dealing with a little bit of mass in social media now. Hopefully, we have had a good time producing our persuasive speeches and imagining that audience, that perceived audience. We know that we are talking to an audience that's much larger than who's in the room, but we don't necessarily know who that audience is. And because of that, we have to deal and manipulate technology in a new 21st century electronic speaking environment. And so, very interesting, I think, as we move forward, the next generation of scholars and speakers thinking about communication. Remember, this class has been a practice in human communication, and it has also been a study of human communication. And we're rewriting the rules and the norms of human communication every day. This has really been a fun end of the semester for me to engage. I've oftentimes thought, what would a speech look like if it was entirely in the electronic apparatus? And so now we have just produced our video versions of our persuasive speeches. And I'm looking forward to evaluating those. And so a couple other things in perception and mass media: selective retrieval. Right? We select information based on its relevance to our own lives. Oftentimes we have a positivity bias. We respond to information that places us in a favorable light, things that we like to remember. Interestingly enough, we also have a certain negativity bias. And so this is somewhat relevant. We often think about the negative things that happen and pay them a little bit more attention sometimes than we do to the positive things. And if you look at the news and you look at media in general, you'll often see this reflected, a negativity bias. They often say in journalism, newspapers, if it bleeds, it reads. Meaning that if you read the headlines in the newspaper almost every single day, you'll see something tragic or even an atrocity on the front headlines. And most of the articles oftentimes start off with something negative, terrible within society. And we might think about all the positive things that happen that same day, all the small, minor things that happen that weren't negative, or the great celebratory positive things that happen, yet we still tend to highlight the negative. And that's just a communication phenomenon noted in our text as the negativity bias. We also have a simplicity bias. A simplicity bias is we tend to simplify things. We tend to remember events based on a simplified organizational schemata, if you will, of what happened. This happened, then that happened, and I felt this way. And that's about it. And so we oftentimes have a simplicity bias. And so it's hard in a classroom to sit there and think about what we do sometimes every day in relation to communication, or to think about our past experiences and to be specific and critical and examine some of these moments, because we tend to just have a simplicity bias and really break things down into a very brief and terse organizational structure. So it's something that we kind of combat in the academic world and in our own intellectual thinking. Social media and perception really coincide here with our self-concept. We have an idea, and I like the concept. Anytime we put concept next to something, it's not necessarily what it is. And so if there's a reality concept, it's not necessarily reality, it's our concept of reality. And so what is your reality concept? What is your self-concept? The self-concept would be how we perceive ourselves, who we understand ourselves to be. And so, are we more who we believe ourselves to be, or are we more who others believe us to be? And so, the concept and the self image, this idea you have of yourself, and then the self image, the idea that you put out there for others. So you might think that you're a very outgoing or not a very outgoing person. I don't see myself as a very outgoing person. And so that's my self concept. But my self image, I go out and try to make up for that. And I'm very talkative and very outgoing. And so others actually might see me as very outgoing. And so your self image, what you put out there for the world, and your self concept, who you believe you are. We manage these things through social media and the representations of ourselves. And through mass media, people's identities and the concepts of other people are represented for us. And we get to judge other people based on their self-image. And that reflects back on our notion of ourselves and our self-concept in a cycle of communication that just looks like every other basic model of communication. Two entities exchanging messages and having a verbal exchange that, remember, that is always cultural, it's always meaningful, and it's influential in some way. Can we talk back to mass media? No, we can't. We go to the movies, we watch television, and we yell at the screen, "Get out of the house, run, no, don't do that." But the screen doesn't listen. And so we cannot talk back to mass media. But that communication interaction is not a one-way street. We can talk to others. Then we can go online and post our analysis, and we can produce new messages that comment on the messages that we receive through mass media. And so impression management, face and face work. So we have our face, and this is the concept that we put out there in the world. And sometimes we do impression management. And so we manage that face. And when we manage this face, it's called face work. Paying attention to the self-image that we are presenting to the world. All of us can do a little bit of management impression right now and go on to our social media platforms and take a look at the self-image that we are putting out there. So this is a question that you might respond to. How is our self-image coincide with our self-concept on our social media platforms? And so does our self-image match our self-concept? Or at times does our self-image contradict our self-concept? In doing this and paying attention to this element, in any way, we are engaged in impression management, doing a little face work, kind of recognizing how we communicate with the world and what images and conceptions of ourselves are we putting out there. So impression management, self-concept and self-image, and how the two coincide with one another at times, or possibly how they might contradict one another. So social media and mass mediated communication oftentimes deals with technology. It deals with a perceived audience. It is oftentimes slightly more professional, meaning that you are dealing with a context that will potentially reach a much larger audience than is in the physical situation. And so hypodermic needle, somewhat interesting. Think about what a hypodermic needle is. What does a hypodermic needle do? Well, it takes something, function, functions in a very similar way. It injects ideas into our system. And so when we look at images and we look at representations of cultures and identities and history and places, we are being interjected with ideas of particular realities. And so this might go without saying, but it's kind of nice to have a theory and a concept. And that's why mediated representations of individuals, cultures, and activities are not innocent. They're very powerful and they're very important because ever since we were young, we've been injected with the ideas of particular realities. And so, next time you're watching television, mainstream news, or film, or binging on any of the entertainment platforms, take a look at some cultural representations and see how your cultural activities, the identities that you are familiar with, see how they are portrayed and how they are represented. You also might take a look at headlines of news and articles and look for an idea that is being injected. What idea is being injected? If we might look at a truck commercial. Oftentimes when I see truck commercials, we oftentimes see a truck in what environment? Yeah, oftentimes we see a truck 4x4ing and in the dirt, climbing a mountain or going off-roading in some way. Right? 9 times out of 10, that's just not how trucks are used in our daily lives. But we often see this sense of adventure and freedom injected into the viewer who might potentially go out and buy a truck. And so hypodermic needle theory, how mediated platforms inject ideas into the systems of the viewers. So this has to do with the reception theory of mass communication, how we receive messages and how those messages impact audiences. And so we might do a little audience analysis. We might do an environmental or demographic audience analysis. Moving on through a couple of those other terms. Demographic and environmental audience analysis, attempting to understand before we speak or before we present an audience to a perceived population, and attempting to understand how they might respond. And so this is from chapter 10, audience analysis and speech delivery. I think very importantly, as we are finalizing our persuasive speeches, is to remember these 3 forms of delivery: manuscript, memorized, and impromptu. Combining all 3 of these, and you have an extemporaneous form of delivery, something that I'm engaging in now. Some things are written down. I have written down notes right in front of me. Some things I've memorized. Other things are just coming out because I'm thinking about them right now. And all of this encompasses an extemporaneous delivery. And this is really what we're looking for. Oftentimes a memorized script sounds very much like a manuscript delivery. Because we memorize it, it sounds just like we're reading it off the page. Impromptu is totally just thought about at the moment, and we're almost always referring to past events and stories and anecdotes that we've heard in the past. And so when you combine all three of these together, you get what we're looking for in this class, which is extemporaneous delivery. Contagion theory. This was very interesting, and I really like this. Studies show that if you are excited about something, and you're exuberant, and you're celebrating something, and you're cheering something on, and I'm speaking to somebody else, the audience is going to be excited about that as well. And so in interpersonal communication, this is often called mirror. And so when we talk to people, they will oftentimes look like we do, and they will speak like we do, and we will respond to each other in kind. And so you might mirror somebody else's behavior. We talked about why someone might do this. Why might you mirror somebody else? Well, to aid in communication. And so you can imagine a far off land where no people are involved and two people happen to cross paths. What happened when they crossed paths? They started to mirror each other. One was aggressive, the other one was aggressive. One was kind, the other one was kind. One was shy, the other one was shy. And so contagion theory works in a public speaking situation. That not only will you influence the audience to see the world as you do, but the audience members will influence other audience members to see the world as they do as well. And so kind of a mob mentality. You've ever gone to a concert or a show, if it isn't going well, it kind of spreads out throughout the audience. I'm not enjoying this. And the people around them won't enjoy it. Think of the Grateful Dead or other bands that spark up a sense of communitas based on the environment of the crowd, and maybe even a little less so than the speakers or the performers themselves. And so not only will audience members be influenced by the speaker, but other audience members will be influenced by each audience member as well. Contagion theory. Remember rhetoric and persuasion? Going back over 2,000 years, the foundation of this course, and then really if we're thinking about this course and communication as a field of study to go further in, this might be a nice place to slow down and really enter into the heart and soul of why this class is offered at every university, and why communication and rhetoric has been in the foundation of a participatory society for over 2,000 years, and it's because of just that. It is the foundation of how we understand the social world that we live in, and that's communication. What type of world do you live in? What type of world do you live in? What type of world would we want to live in? And we are continually talking about this. Formally, through the courts and laws, informally, in discussions at home, and then culturally and socially through our mediated images and representations of each other. So rhetoric and persuasion, of course, ethos, pathos, logos, credibility, emotional appeals, and logic or reasoning. Don't forget kairos, timing, and mythos, societal beliefs. Once again, you can respond to our sixth question here. Another one about the mythos. I really like the response to this question. What societal beliefs are ingrained in our consciousness? What societal mythos do we come to understand as true? And think about that root word myth in mythos. Not all of these are real or true, but we come to believe that they are. And so many of these we were taught when we were very young. So what are some of our societal values or beliefs, or as Aristotle noted, mythos? Epidectic rhetoric, one of my favorites. Talking a lot about this epidectic rhetoric in my CO 350 class. And so if you're interested in communication, once again, CO 350 discusses a little bit more of this ancient branch of rhetorical theory, epidectic rhetoric, which is display, public displays of values. And so everything that we do in the public sphere is influential and political in some way. And so even if we're crossing the street, even if we're sitting down on a park bench or going to the beach or skateboarding or biking down the street, we are involved in a public display of certain values. And so Aristotle noted that we are either praising certain values or blaming other values. And so epidectic rhetoric is the ancient branch of rhetorical display. And so how we display and communicate certain values through our everyday activities. We might think of everyday activities like sporting events, marches, parades, gatherings, barbecues, yard sales, so on and so forth. Okay, everybody, we're moving right into about 5 more minutes. The IG Live turns off right on the hour. And so also remember H. Hawkins F on YouTube. This lecture will be available there. Remember, we have 6 questions that we want to respond to in total as we wrap up the end of the semester. Turn in that persuasive speech assignment, both the written outline component as well as the video version of your speech. I'm really looking forward to this. Remember, if you're having some trouble emailing me a self-contained file of the speech via my email, you might use Google Docs or Drive. And then we have a few other secondary platforms that we might go to if need be. Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and as a very last resort, WhatsApp. And so if you're having trouble, make sure you email me and we'll finish off the semester strong with that final assignment. Next week, we'll have your Unit 2 test. And so you will have a window to produce this Unit 2 test, and it will be from Monday to Thursday. I will issue the test on Monday, and everybody should work diligently and try to get it in by Thursday. Remember, the Unit 2 study guide is up as well, and we should be referring to this study guide and preparing for that window that we have to take the test. I hope everybody's doing well, staying intellectually engaged in their own lives in this course, and finishing the semester strong. So I wanted to get that out before the time runs out on the IG Live. Impression management, some of the ways that we manage our own impressions. And so we often call this face work, doing face work. Ask that question, take a look at your social media accounts and do a little impression management. Maybe add a little theoretical lens to it. How is my self-concept functioning in relation to my self-image here? And in doing so, we're engaged in a little impression management. Media representations. Media representations have been talked about a lot lately. Remember a little bit of a couple turns society has taken where we can see a lot of these concepts that we've been discussing in class. The cultural turn, the linguistic or symbolic turn are 2 that are discussed here. Culture is important. At the end of the day, culture is one of the only things we have, one of the things that we have to defend our way of viewing the world. And when that way of viewing the world is misrepresented or represented accurately, we see ourselves differently and see the world differently. And so media representations are forms of communication that are influential. They're cultural, social, and they're also political. In political, they have to do with power. So next time you're watching television or film, Pay attention to the representations of different identities and cultures, and pay attention now to power. Who has the power in a situation? Who's successful at the end of the day? Who is being demonized, marginalized, or silenced? And we might engage in a little bit of artifact analysis and examinations of our shared media representations. What if we don't see any representations of our culture, identities, or places? We might offer an idea that Bell Hooks discusses as oppositional reading. And so at that point, we can engage in a little oppositional reading, reading into a situation what is not being presented to us. And that's what we get to do as an audience, as the receivers of any messages. We can look into a message and examine it for what's there, but we can also examine it for what is not there. So I have about a minute left. Thank you for tuning in. As we look towards our persuasive speeches and we recognize an issue out there in society, you might recognize what is not being represented in society. And note that this is a problem. Go forward, propose a solution, and then ultimately produce an outline and produce an electronic version of your persuasive speech. Email these documents and files to me. If you have any trouble, please let me know, and we'll discuss how to upload and submit and ultimately transmit that electronic file.